The last day of death row inmate, Gary Ray Bowles, what happened before his final breath? Hi everyone. In the summer of 1994, a wave of fear swept across the East Coast. 6 men, all found in eerily similar circumstances, their lives taken with calculated cruelty, their trust betrayed. The man responsible was Gary Ray Bowles, drifter whose dark past and twisted hatred fueled a series of killings that would put him on the FBI's most wanted list. For decades, he sat on Florida's death row, a figure both infamous and forgotten, until August 22, 2019, when the clock finally ran out. But what happens to a man like Bowles when there's no more running, no more appeals, and only hours left to live? Was there fear in those final moments, regret, or was the silence louder than any confession? Tonight, we step inside the heavily guarded walls of Florida State Prison to uncover the final 24 hours of Gary Ray Bowles. Dear friends, August 22, 2019 began like any other morning inside Florida State Prison in Rayford. Except for one man. At 4 a.m., Gary Ray Bowles opened his eyes for the final time. The concrete walls, the steel door, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. He had known them for decades. But today they marked the edges of his world for the last time. His execution was scheduled for that evening. To understand the weight of that day, we have to go back to where it began. Not the crime spree that made headlines, but the life that shaped the man. Born January 25, 1962, in Clifton Forge, Virginia, Bowles entered the world already missing something most of us take for granted. His father, who had died of black lung disease before Gary was even born. His mother, remarried. But the men who entered his life brought more harm than help. Abusive stepfathers, beatings, and worse, left deep scars by the age of 9. Bowles was running away from home, sleeping wherever he could. School became a distant memory. By his teens, he had turned to survival sex work, offering himself to older men for money, food, or shelter. That dangerous cycle carried into adulthood. By his early 30s, Bowles was drifting from city to city, working odd jobs and living on the streets. For a brief time, life seemed to stabilize. He moved in with a girlfriend in Daytona Beach, and there was even a pregnancy. But when she discovered he had been prostituting himself to men, the relationship ended. She chose to have an odd blast abortion, and to Bowles, this was more than heartbreak, it was humiliation. Somewhere in that twisted mix of rejection and rage, Bowles formed a deadly belief that gay men had ruined his life. And from that belief came a series of killings that would shock the nation. It began in March 1994. 59-year-old John Hardy Roberts met Bowles and offered him a place to stay. Roberts was kind, but in Bowles' mind, kindness didn't erase the hatred brewing inside. One night, Bowles beat and strangled. Roberts stole his credit cards and vanished. Over the next 6 months, he left a trail of death across the East Coast savannah. Atlanta Hilliard, 6 men in total, all killed in a pattern that mixed brutality with cold calculation. In November 1994, Bowles murdered 42-year-old Walter Jamal Hinton in Jacksonville Beach by dropping a 40-pound concrete block on his head and forcing a towel down his throat. Days later, police caught up with him. Bowles confessed to all 6 killings. His trial for Hinton's murder ended in a death sentence, and later he received another for Roberts' murder. Even after one sentence was overturned and retried, the outcome remained the same: death row in Florida. Fast forward to the morning of his execution. Prison guards approached Bowles' cell just after sunrise. "It's time to get ready, Gary," one said. Bowles nodded silently. He was calmly calm. He took a shower, changed into a plain white shirt and beige trousers, and sat quietly in his holding cell. Breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, grits, and juice, but he barely touched it. There were no visitors, no spiritual advisor, and no family waiting to see him. Bowles had chosen to face the end alone. Around mid-morning, he asked for a Bible and read silently. Though witnesses noted, there was no visible prayer. As noon approached, the prison was quiet, except for the distant sounds of doors slamming and boots on concrete. Bowles lay on his cot, sometimes sitting forward with his head in his hands, sometimes pacing slowly. He spoke to no one unless necessary. The staff trained for this exact day moved through the motions with professional detachment. At 3 p.m., medical staff entered to conduct the required pre-execution check. Blood pressure, heart rate, pupil response, all were normal. Bowles complied without protest. The irony was grim, confirming a man was healthy enough to be executed. An hour later, his last meal arrived: 3 cheeseburgers, French fries, and strips of bacon. He ate slowly, leaving much of it untouched. Outside the prison, protesters held candles, some calling for justice, others for mercy. Inside, a last-minute legal fight was unfolding. Bowles' lawyers filed an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing he was intellectually disabled and therefore ineligible for execution under the Constitution. Scheduled 6 p.m. Execution time neared. The process was put on hold. Bowles was escorted to the execution chamber, then taken back to his holding cell to wait. Hours passed. The tension was heavy. Shortly before 10:30 p.m., word came from Washington. Appeal was denied. The execution would proceed. This time, Bowles walked the final steps to the chamber without delay. Witnesses said he appeared calm, almost detached. He had no last spoken words. Instead, he left behind a handwritten statement. In it, he apologized to the family of Walter Hinton, writing, "I never wanted to kill him, and I'm sorry for all of the pain and suffering I have caused. I hope my death erases your pain." He also addressed his mother, "Having to deal with your son being a monster is terrible. I'm so very sorry." At 10:42 p.m., the execution began. The first drug, a sedative, entered his veins. His breathing grew slower. His lips turned purple, his face pale. A paralytic followed, stilling his body. And finally, potassium acetate stopped his heart. At 10:58 p.m., Gary Ray Bowles was pronounced dead. For the families of his victims, it was the end of a long chapter, though for many, closure remained out of reach. Outside the prison, some wept, others cheered, and some simply stood in silence. Inside, the witnesses filed out quietly, carrying with them the memory of a man who had taken so much and in the end faced his fate alone. Bowles' ashes were never publicly claimed. There was no funeral, no public memorial. For the world, his name faded into history. For those whose lives he shattered, the wounds remain a reminder of the darkness a person can carry and the thin line between trust and betrayal. Gary Ray Bowles' final day closed a violent chapter that began decades earlier, shaped by a life of abuse, rejection, and choices that led to 6 innocent men losing their lives. His written apology, whether seen as sincere remorse or a final attempt to rewrite his legacy, could never undo the pain he caused. For the families, the execution brought a mix of relief and renewed grief, a reminder that justice doesn't erase loss. In the sterile quiet of the execution chamber, Bowles left the world the way he lived. Much of his life alone, his ashes went unclaimed, his name eventually slipping from headlines. Yet for those who remember the victims, the story doesn't end with the death of their killer. It endures as a chilling lesson in how hatred can take root, how trust can be betrayed, and how even the final 24 hours of a life can leave questions that will never truly be answered.